There are moments in life that cut so deep, so raw, that you carry them with you every single day, like a stone in your shoe that never stops rubbing, never stops reminding you. But there are other moments, rare ones, that carve something else entirely, something that grows so quietly, so secretly, that by the time it blooms, it has already changed everything. This is one of those stories. This is a story about a man who had every reason to walk away, every reason to let bitterness eat him alive, but who chose instead to build something beautiful in the shadows. This is a story about William Patterson. And it begins, as all great stories do, with a letter in the mail. Before I take you into the depths of this remarkable journey, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about the last time you felt truly powerless. Think about the last time you watched someone you loved self-destruct, making terrible choices, destroying everything in their path, and you could do nothing but stand there and watch. Feel that helplessness for just a moment. Because that is exactly where William Patterson found himself on a Thursday morning in October, when he opened his mailbox and found a letter that would shatter everything he thought he knew. If you find yourself moved by tales of quiet sacrifice and unexpected strength, please take a moment to share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes the smallest gesture of connection can change everything, and your subscription helps us bring more of these stories to light. The house on Maple Street had been in the Patterson family for 3 generations. William's grandfather had built it with his own hands back in 1942, a sturdy brick colonial with a wraparound porch and a big oak tree in the front yard. The oak tree had been planted the same year the house was built, a tiny sapling that William's grandfather had brought from the nursery in the back of his pickup truck. He dug the hole himself, had carefully placed the roots in the earth, had watered it and tended it and watched it grow over the years. By the time William's father was born, the tree was already tall enough to provide shade for the front yard. By the time William was born, it was a towering presence, a symbol of the strength and stability of the Patterson family. William's father had grown up in that house, had raised his own family there, had passed it on to William when he retired from the law practice he'd built over 40 years. The house was more than just a building to William. It was a living monument to his family's history, a testament to the values that had guided them for generations. Hard work, integrity, loyalty. The belief that family was the most important thing in the world. William Patterson had spent his entire adult life in that house. He'd been a school principal for 35 years, a man who believed in discipline and hard work and the importance of building a future for the next generation. He'd raised his son Michael in that house, had taught him right from wrong, had tried to instill in him the values that had guided the Patterson family for generations. He'd spent countless hours in the backyard with Michael, playing catch, teaching him how to ride a bike, showing him how to plant flowers in the garden. He'd read to Michael at bedtime, had helped him with his homework, had attended every school play and baseball game and parent-teacher conference. But somewhere along the way, something had gone terribly wrong. William was 70 years old now, retired, living alone in the house his father had built. His wife, Eleanor, had passed away 8 years ago, taken by a stroke that had come without warning. She'd been the heart of the family, the steady hand that kept everything together. After she was gone, William had tried to keep things going, had tried to maintain the routines and traditions that had defined their lives. But it wasn't the same. It would never be the same. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. The rooms that had once been filled with laughter and conversation were now empty and still. William would sit in his father's old armchair in the living room, reading the newspaper or watching the evening news, and feel the weight of all those years pressing down on him. So many memories. So many moments. So many dreams that had been fulfilled and some that had been broken. The oak tree was still there, standing tall and proud in the front yard. Its branches had grown thick and strong over the decades, providing shade for generations of Patterson children. William would look at that tree and think about his grandfather, the man who had planted it, the man who had believed in the future so strongly that he'd put down roots that would outlast him. He'd think about his father, the man who had nurtured that tree, who had watched it grow, who had passed it on to the next generation. And he'd think about himself, the man who was supposed to pass it on to his own son. And then there was Michael. Michael Patterson had been born in 1982, a healthy baby boy with his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness. William had been 35 then, already a rising star in the school system, already being groomed for the principalship that would eventually come his way. He'd been so proud of his son, so full of hope and dreams for the future. The day Michael was born, William had stood in the hospital room, holding his newborn son in his arms, and made a promise to himself. He would give this child everything he'd never had. He would make sure Michael had every opportunity, every advantage, every chance to succeed. He would be the father that his own father had been, the kind of father who was always there, always supportive, always believing in his children. Michael's going to be something special, William would tell his friends, his colleagues, anyone who would listen. He's got the world in front of him. He can do anything he sets his mind to. And for a while, it seemed like William was right. Michael was a bright child, quick-witted and charming, with a smile that could get him out of almost any trouble. He did well in school, made friends easily, had a natural charisma that drew people to him. William had seen all the potential in his son, had wanted to nurture it, to help Michael become the man he knew he could be. "I'm going to make something of myself, Dad," Michael would say, his eyes shining with youthful ambition. "I'm going to be successful. I'm going to make you proud." William had believed him. He'd believed in his son with all his heart. The childhood memories were filled with warmth and love. William remembered teaching Michael how to ride a bike in the driveway, running alongside him, holding the seat steady until Michael found his balance. He remembered taking Michael to the hardware store on Saturday mornings, letting him pick out new tools for the workshop, teaching him how to use them safely. He remembered family dinners at the big oak table, Eleanor's cooking filling the house with wonderful smells, Michael's laughter echoing through the rooms. But somewhere along the way, the bright-eyed boy had started to change. The charm had become manipulation. The charisma had become a tool for getting what he wanted. The ambition had curdled into entitlement. Michael had started to believe that the world owed him something, that he deserved success without having to work for it, that rules were for other people. William noticed the changes, of course. He was a principal, after all, a man who'd spent his life working with young people, watching them grow and change and sometimes struggle. He could see that Michael was struggling, that something was wrong, that his son was pulling away from him. But every time he tried to reach out, Michael would push him away. Every time he tried to help, Michael would tell him everything was fine. It was Eleanor who had tried to warn him. She'd seen the changes too, had been more perceptive than William, had recognized the signs of something deeper going on. But William had dismissed her concerns, had told her that Michael was just going through a phase, that he'd grow out of it, that he'd eventually find his way. He'd been wrong. The warning signs had been there for years, if only William had been willing to see them. Michael's grades had started to slip in high school, but he'd always had an excuse. The teacher didn't like him. The material was boring. It wasn't his fault. He was just too smart for the classes they put him in. "Michael, you need to apply yourself," William had said, more times than he could count. "You're capable of so much more than this." "I know, Dad," Michael would reply, his voice full of practiced remorse. "I'll do better. I promise." And for a while, he would. He'd buckle down, raise his grades, make William believe that things were finally going to change. But then something would happen. A new crowd of friends. A new interest. A new obsession that took his attention away from the things that mattered. William remembered the first time he'd caught Michael in a serious lie. It was his senior year of high school, and Michael had told him he was going to the library to study for his final exams. But William had driven past the library that evening and seen Michael's car in the parking lot of a pizza place across town. He'd walked in and found Michael sitting with a group of friends, laughing and talking, not a textbook in sight. "Michael," William had said, his voice cold with disappointment. "What are you doing here?" Michael's face had flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Dad, I was just taking a break. I was going to study later." "You told me you were at the library. You lied to me." "Come on, Dad. It's not a big deal. Everyone does it." "It is a big deal, Michael. Trust is the foundation of our relationship. When you lie to me, you break that trust. And once it's broken, it's very hard to repair." Michael had rolled his eyes, had muttered something under his breath, had stormed out of the restaurant. William had watched him go, feeling a sickening sense of dread in his stomach. Something was wrong. Something had gone terribly wrong with his son. After high school, Michael had bounced from job to job, never staying anywhere for more than a few months. He'd had a string of relationships that all ended badly. He'd borrowed money from William repeatedly, always promising to pay it back, never following through. William had given him chance after chance, always believing that this time would be different, this time his son would finally get his act together. "He's just a late bloomer," William would tell himself. "He's finding his way. He'll figure it out eventually." But eventually had never come. It was Eleanor who had discovered the gambling. She'd found the betting slips hidden in Michael's room, The credit card statements showing cash advances at casinos, the frantic texts to friends asking for money to cover his debts. "William, we need to do something," she'd said, her voice full of worry and fear. "Michael has a problem. A serious problem. If we don't help him, he's going to destroy himself." William had confronted Michael, had tried to make him understand the seriousness of what he was doing. Michael had cried, had apologized, had promised to get help. But the promises were empty. The gambling continued. The lies continued. The slow, painful destruction of Michael's life continued. William remembered the first time Michael had admitted to losing a significant amount of money. It was $5,000, a sum that had taken William months to save. Michael had come to him with tears in his eyes, had confessed that he'd gambled it away in a single weekend, had begged William to help him. "Dad, I'm so sorry," Michael had sobbed. "I didn't mean to lose it all. I was going to win it back. I was going to double it. I was going to make it right." "Michael, how could you do this?" William had asked, his voice full of disbelief. "How could you throw away $5,000 on something as foolish as gambling?" "I don't know, Dad. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just can't stop. Every time I try, something pulls me back in. I need help. I really need help." William had given him the money, had told him it was the last time, had made him promise to get counseling. Michael had promised, had said he would, had never followed through. Eleanor's death had been the final blow. Michael had been devastated, had seemed to spiral even further out of control. William had tried to be there for him, had tried to help him through his grief, but Michael had pushed him away. He'd retreated into his own world, a world of lies and excuses and endless, self-destructive behavior. William had tried to get him help. He'd offered to pay for counseling, to support Michael through rehab, to do whatever it took to get his son back on track. But Michael had refused. He'd said he didn't have a problem. He'd said William was overreacting. He'd said he could handle it on his own. He couldn't. And now, everything was about to collapse. The day the letter arrived was like any other Thursday. William had woken up at 6 in the morning, as he always did, had made his coffee and read the newspaper, had eaten his breakfast at the kitchen table. The sun was shining outside, the autumn leaves were beginning to turn, and the world seemed peaceful and ordinary. But when the mail arrived, everything changed. William walked to the front door, his joints aching with the familiar pain of arthritis. He'd been a principal for 35 years, had spent most of his adult life on his feet, and his body was paying the price. He'd had both knees replaced, had undergone surgery for carpal tunnel syndrome, had a long list of other ailments that made him feel older than he really was. But he didn't complain. That wasn't who he was. He was a Patterson, and Pattersons didn't complain. They just kept going. The mail slot clattered, and William picked up the handful of envelopes that had fallen onto the floor. Bills. Circulars. A letter from the Alumni Association. And then, at the bottom of the pile, a large manila envelope with the name of a law firm printed in the corner. William's hands were steady as he opened it. He was a practical man, a man who'd faced his share of challenges over the years, a man who believed that problems were to be solved, not avoided. He'd dealt with angry parents and difficult students and bureaucratic red tape. He'd managed budgets and staff and crumbling school buildings. He'd buried his wife and watched his son self-destruct. He could handle whatever this was. But as he read the letter, his hands began to shake. "Dear Mr. Patterson, this letter is to inform you that a foreclosure proceeding has been initiated against the property located at 742 Maple Street, Paradise Valley, Arizona. A home equity loan in the amount of $500,000 was taken out against your property on March 15, 2024. The loan has been in default for 6 months, and the bank is now exercising its right to seize the property. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you wish to contest this action, you must appear at the foreclosure hearing scheduled for November 15. William read the letter twice, then a third time. A home equity loan? Against his house. He'd never taken out a home equity loan. He'd never signed any such documents. He'd been paying off his mortgage for 40 years. The house was supposed to be his, free and clear, the one thing he could count on, the one thing that was truly his. But as he stared at the letter, a horrible realization began to dawn on him. He hadn't signed anything. But someone else had. Someone who knew his personal information, his social security number, his financial history. Someone who knew him well enough to forge his signature. Someone who had access to his home. Someone who had been living with him for the past 2 years. Someone who owed massive gambling debts. Michael. William found Michael in the basement, sitting in front of his computer, playing some online game. He was 37 years old, living in his father's house, unemployed, spending his days gambling and playing video games. He was charming and handsome and utterly incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. "Michael," William said, his voice cold and steady. "I need to talk to you." Michael didn't look up from his screen. "In a minute, Dad. I'm in the middle of something." "Now." Something in William's voice made Michael pause. He turned around, saw the expression on his father's face, and his confident smile faltered for just a moment. "What's wrong, Dad? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I found this in the mail," William said, holding up the foreclosure notice. "A home equity loan against my house. $500,000. Can you explain that to me?" Michael's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Michael, I'm asking you a question. I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I didn't take out any loan. Somebody did. Somebody forged my signature. Somebody who knew my personal information. Somebody who has been living in my house for the past 2 years, eating my food, using my electricity, never paying a dime in rent." Michael's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, a lie, anything that might get him out of this. But there was no escape. The evidence was right there, in his father's hand. "Dad, I can explain," Michael said, his voice pleading now. "It was a mistake. I was trying to help. I found a business opportunity, a chance to make some real money. I just needed a little capital to get started. I was going to pay it back. I was going to make everything right." "A business opportunity," William repeated, his voice flat. "You forged my signature, stole $500,000 from my house, and you're telling me it was a business opportunity?" "I was going to win it back," Michael said, his voice cracking. "I just needed one big score. One lucky break. And then everything would have been fine." "Win it back," William said, understanding dawning on him. "You gambled it. You gambled away my house." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, please. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just got caught up in the moment, and before I knew it." William didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at his son, and felt something inside him die. The hope he'd carried for so long, the faith he'd kept alive despite everything, the belief that Michael would eventually turn things around. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. William remembered all the times he'd given Michael a second chance. All the times he'd believed that this time would be different. All the times he'd been disappointed. And now, this. The final betrayal. The ultimate act of selfishness. The one that would cost William everything he'd worked for his entire life. "Get out," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, please." "I said get out. I want you out of my house right now." Michael opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He stood up slowly, grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, he paused and turned back. "Dad, I know you're angry. I know you have every right to be. But I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make it right. I promise." William didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at his son, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. After a long moment, Michael turned and walked up the stairs. A few minutes later, William heard the front door close. He was alone. After Michael left, William sat down at the kitchen table and tried to make sense of what had just happened. His son had forged his signature, had stolen $500,000 against his house, had gambled it all away. The house that had been in his family for 3 generations was going to be taken away from him. Everything he'd worked for, everything his father had worked for, everything his grandfather had worked for, was going to be lost. William felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He'd been so trusting. So naive. He'd believed that Michael was just going through a rough patch, that he'd eventually get his act together. He'd never thought to check the bank statements, the credit card bills, the insurance policies. He'd never thought to protect himself from his own son. But now, he looked. And what he found broke his heart. William started going through his financial records, looking for anything that seemed suspicious. He pulled out his bank statements, his credit card bills, his insurance policies. He spread them out on the kitchen table and started going through them one by one. Small amounts, taken over years. $20 here, $50 there. Never enough to notice immediately, never enough to raise suspicion. But added together over time, They amounted to thousands of dollars. Money that Michael had stolen from his own father. William remembered the cash he used to keep in the kitchen drawer, for emergencies. It had always been there, $100 or so, just in case. He'd thought he'd just been spending it without thinking. But it had been Michael. Taking a little here and there, confident that his father would never notice. He remembered the credit card bills that had been slightly higher than expected. The ATM withdrawals that didn't quite add up. The small discrepancies that he'd always dismissed as mistakes. They weren't mistakes. They were theft. William thought about all the times Michael had come to him with a sob story, a desperate need for money, a promise to pay it back. He'd always given in, always believed that this time would be different. He'd been a fool. A trusting fool who'd been taken advantage of by his own son. And now, the big one. The $500,000 loan against his house. The final betrayal, the ultimate act of selfishness, the one that would cost William everything he'd worked for his entire life. William sat in his father's old armchair and stared out the window at the oak tree in the front yard. The leaves were starting to turn, red and gold and brown, the colors of autumn. It was beautiful, this season. But it was also the season of endings. The season of letting go. He thought about his father, the man who had built this house, who had raised his family here, who had passed it on to him. He thought about his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally. He thought about his wife Eleanor, the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. And he thought about Michael, the son who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. How had it come to this? William didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. The foreclosure hearing was in 3 weeks. He had to find a way to fight back, to prove that the loan was fraudulent, to save his house. But he didn't know where to start. The house creaked around him, the familiar sounds of an old house settling into its bones. William had lived in this house for so long that he knew every sound, every creak, every groan. He knew the way the floorboards in the hallway squeaked just outside the bathroom. He knew the way the kitchen faucet dripped if you didn't turn it just right. He knew the way the wind whistled through the gaps in the windows during winter storms. But tonight, the sounds seemed different. They seemed ominous, threatening, like the house itself was warning him of something terrible to come. William pulled the covers up to his chin and stared at the ceiling, trying to calm his racing heart. He thought about Michael. Where was he now? Was he somewhere safe? Was he thinking about what he'd done? Was he feeling any remorse at all? William wanted to believe that Michael was sorry, that he regretted what he'd done, that he was going to find a way to make things right. But he'd been disappointed so many times before. William remembered when Michael was a little boy, how he'd crawl into bed with his parents after a nightmare, how he'd curl up in the space between them, how he'd feel safe and protected. William had held him then, had whispered reassurances, had promised that nothing would ever hurt him. He'd been so sure that he could protect his son from everything. He'd been so wrong. The hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour. William tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. He tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. He tried to plan, but his mind was too full of fear and anger and grief. Finally, around 4 in the morning, William gave up on sleep. He got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and made himself a cup of coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the dark street, and tried to figure out what to do next. He needed a lawyer. A good one. Someone who could help him fight this. Someone who could help him save his house. But who could he call? He didn't know any lawyers. He'd never needed one before. He'd lived a quiet, peaceful life, a life without lawsuits or legal disputes. He was a retired school principal, not a businessman. He didn't have a network of lawyers and financial advisors. Then William remembered. His father had been a lawyer. His father had spent 40 years building a successful law practice, had represented hundreds of clients over the years. And his father's old law partner, Arthur Jenkins, was still alive. Arthur was in his 80s now, retired like William, but still sharp as a tack. He'd been friends with William's father for decades, had helped him build his practice, had been there for all the important moments in the Patterson family's life. William picked up the phone and dialed Arthur's number. It was early in the morning, but Arthur was an early riser, always had been. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur, it's William. I need your help. It's about the house. Someone took out a loan against it. A $500,000 loan. And I think Michael did it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice was grave. "William, sit down. I need to tell you something. Your father and I, we always worried about something like this. That's why we set up the trust. William felt his heart skip a beat. A trust? What are you talking about? Your father was a smart man, William. He knew that things could go wrong in families. He knew that money could do terrible things to people. He saw it in his practice, over and over again. Families torn apart by greed, by jealousy, by the desperate need for more. He didn't want that to happen to his family. So before he passed away, he asked me to help him set up a legal protection plan for the house. The deed is held in an irrevocable trust. You have the right to live in the house for as long as you want, but the house itself is protected. No one can take it, no matter what. Not even a fraudulent loan. William felt tears sting his eyes. His father had seen this coming. He'd known that something might happen, that someone might try to take the house away. And he'd done something about it. He'd protected William from beyond the grave. Arthur, I don't know what to say, William said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. Your father wanted it that way, Arthur said. He didn't want you to worry. He wanted you to be able to live your life in peace, knowing that the house was safe. But he also wanted me to tell you, if anything ever happened. He wanted you to know that you were protected. William sat down, overwhelmed by the weight of his father's foresight. All those years, his father had been looking out for him, even after he was gone. The house was safe. The house would always be safe. But Arthur, William said, what about Michael? What about everything he's done? Arthur was silent for a moment. William, what Michael did was a crime. He forged your signature. He stole from you. He tried to take everything you have. He's going to have to face the consequences of that. But first, we need to make sure you're protected. And then we need to decide what to do about him. William thought about it for a long moment. Michael was his son. He loved him, despite everything. He wanted to believe that Michael could change, that he could be the man he'd always hoped he'd be. But he also knew that Michael had to face the consequences of his actions. He couldn't keep protecting him from himself. Arthur, William said, I want to gather evidence. I want to build a case against the bank. I want to prove that the loan was fraudulent and that I'm not responsible for it. And I want to make sure that Michael can't do this to anyone else. I'll help you, William, Arthur said. We'll get through this together. With Arthur's help, William began gathering evidence. He went through his financial records, photocopying everything that seemed suspicious. He pulled his bank statements, his credit card bills, his insurance policies. He found the loan documents that Michael had forged, the signatures that didn't quite look right, the dates that didn't match up. William spread everything out on the kitchen table, organizing it into folders and binders. He was methodical, careful, determined to leave no stone unturned. He'd been a principal for 35 years, had managed budgets and staff and school buildings. He knew how to be organized, how to pay attention to detail, how to build a case. Arthur came over that afternoon to help him review the documents. They sat at the kitchen table together, going through the evidence one piece at a time. The signatures here, Arthur said, holding up the loan documents. They're close, but they're not quite right. The loops on the P are different. The slant is off. Any handwriting expert would be able to tell that they're forgeries. William nodded. Michael has always had a good eye for detail. He probably practiced my signature until he got it right. But he couldn't get it perfect. And here, Arthur said, pointing to the date on the loan documents. March 15, 2024. You were in the hospital that week. You had your knee surgery. You couldn't have signed anything. You were under anesthesia for 3 days. William felt a surge of hope. That's right. I was in the hospital. I have the records to prove it. We'll need those records, Arthur said. We'll need everything. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be. William also started documenting Michael's behavior. He kept a journal of everything Michael said and did, every lie he told, every manipulation he tried. He recorded their conversations, making sure to get Michael's admissions of guilt on tape. He set up hidden cameras in the house, small devices that were almost invisible. He wanted to capture Michael's behavior, to prove what he was doing. He didn't know if it would be admissible in court, but he wanted to have it anyway. One night, William came home to find Michael in the kitchen, ransacking the drawers. He was looking for something, cash or valuables, anything he could sell to pay off his debts. Michael, William said, his voice calm but firm. What are you doing? Michael spun around, his face flushed with panic. Nothing, Dad. I was just looking for something. I thought I left my wallet in here. Your wallet is on the kitchen counter. I saw you leave it there this morning. Michael's eyes darted around the room. He was cornered, and he knew it. "Dad, I need money. Just a little. I'll pay you back, I promise." "You promised that before, Michael. You promised that about the loan. And look where we are." "Dad, please. I'm desperate. They're going to hurt me. The people I owe money to, they're not messing around. They're going to hurt me if I don't pay them." William looked at his son, saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation. For a moment, he felt a flicker of pity. This was his son, his child, the boy he'd raised and loved. But then he remembered the stolen money, the forged signatures, the loan that had threatened to take everything he had. "I can't help you, Michael. Not anymore. You've made your choices. Now you have to live with them." What Michael didn't know was that William had installed hidden cameras in the house. He'd done it the day after he discovered the foreclosure notice, knowing that Michael might do something desperate. The cameras were small, almost invisible, hidden in the bookshelves and the light fixtures and the vents. William watched Michael try to open the safe, his hands shaking, his face contorted with rage and frustration. He watched his son fail, over and over again, finally giving up and slamming the door in defeat. William saved the footage. He saved everything. The attempted break-in. The desperate pleas for money. The admissions of guilt. All of it, carefully documented, carefully preserved. Arthur came over to review the footage with him. They sat in William's office, watching the video on the computer screen. "This is powerful evidence, William," Arthur said. "It shows a pattern of behavior, a pattern of desperation and deceit. It will be very helpful in court." William nodded. "I know. I just wish it hadn't come to this." "None of us wished for this, William. But we have to deal with the reality of the situation. Michael made his choices, and now we have to deal with the consequences." William thought about what Arthur had said. Consequences. That was the key word. Michael had spent his whole life avoiding consequences, avoiding responsibility, avoiding the truth about himself. And now, the consequences were finally catching up with him. When Michael left the next morning, William called Arthur. "I have the evidence," he said. "All of it. The loan documents. The thefts. The attempts to steal from me. Everything." "Good," Arthur said. "Then we're ready. The hearing is in 2 weeks. We're going to win this, William. And we're going to make sure Michael faces the consequences of what he's done." William felt a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had some control over the situation. He was going to fight back. He was going to protect himself. And he was going to make his son face the truth. The night before the hearing, William couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. He thought about his father, the man who had built this house and raised his family there. He thought about his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally. He thought about his wife Eleanor, the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. And he thought about Michael. His son. The boy he had raised, the boy he had loved, the boy who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. William got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. He made a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and looked out the window at the oak tree in the front yard. The leaves were gone now, bare branches reaching up toward the night sky. Winter was coming. The season of death and dormancy. But also the season of renewal. The season when things slept, waiting to be reborn in the spring. William thought about the trust, the protection his father had created for him. He thought about the evidence he'd gathered, the case he'd built. And he thought about Michael, about what would happen to him after the hearing. He knew that Michael would probably go to prison. The evidence was overwhelming, the fraud undeniable. Michael had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, had forged William's signature, had tried to take everything his father owned. There would be consequences. Serious consequences. But William also knew that prison wasn't the end. It could be a beginning. A chance for Michael to change, to grow, to become the man he'd always been capable of becoming. It was up to Michael to take that chance. William couldn't do it for him. The hours passed slowly. William sat at the kitchen table, watching the sky slowly lighten in the east. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a new day. A day of reckoning. A day of truth. William dressed carefully that morning, choosing a suit he hadn't worn in years. It was his father's suit, the one he'd worn to his own retirement party. It was a little too big for William, but it felt right somehow, like he was wearing his father's strength along with his father's clothes. Arthur picked him up at 8 in the morning. They drove to the courthouse together, William sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the familiar streets of Paradise Valley. He'd lived in this town for 70 years. He'd raised his family here, built his career here, buried his wife here. And now, he was fighting to keep his home. "You ready for this?" Arthur asked, as they pulled into the courthouse parking lot. William took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good. Remember, the trust is ironclad. The bank doesn't have a leg to stand on. And we have the evidence to prove it." William nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Michael. About what would happen to him. About whether there was any hope for him, any chance that he could change, that he could become the man he'd always been capable of becoming. The courthouse was a large, imposing building, built in the classical style with dull columns and a grand entrance. William had been here before, years ago, when he'd served on a jury. He remembered the feeling of being part of something important, of doing his civic duty. He'd never imagined that he'd be back here as a plaintiff, fighting to save his home from his own son. The hearing was held in a small courtroom on the second floor. William arrived early, accompanied by Arthur Jenkins. They carried a briefcase full of evidence, documents that would prove beyond any doubt that the loan was fraudulent and that the house was protected. Michael was there too, sitting on the other side of the courtroom. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When William walked in, Michael looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. William saw something in his son's eyes. Fear. Desperation. And something else. Something that looked almost like regret. William took his seat at the plaintiff's table, Arthur beside him. The bank's attorneys were there too, a team of 3 sharp-suited lawyers who looked confident and prepared. They'd been doing this for years, going up against people like William, people who didn't have the resources to fight back. They thought they had this in the bag. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, stern and no-nonsense, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She opened the proceedings with a brief summary of the case. "This hearing is to determine whether the property at 742 Maple Street should be foreclosed upon due to a default on a home equity loan. The loan was taken out by William Patterson in March of 2024. The loan has been in default for 6 months, and the bank is now exercising its right to seize the property." The bank's attorney stood up and began presenting their case. They showed the loan documents, the signatures that were supposed to be William's, the transfer of funds into Michael's account. It was a straightforward case, on the surface. William had taken out a loan, hadn't paid it back, and now the bank was taking his house. But William knew the truth. And soon, the judge would know it too. "Your Honor," Arthur said, standing up. "I object to the bank's evidence. The signatures on these documents are clearly forgeries. My client, William Patterson, never signed any such loan. We have extensive evidence to prove that the loan was fraudulently obtained by his son, Michael Patterson." The bank's attorney looked taken aback. He'd been so confident, so sure of his case. He hadn't expected a challenge. He hadn't expected evidence. "Your Honor, the bank acted in good faith," the attorney said. "We had no reason to believe that the loan was fraudulent. The signatures appeared legitimate. The documentation was complete. We followed all proper procedures." "Following procedures is one thing," Arthur said. "But it's also your responsibility to verify the identity of the borrower. You failed to do that. You approved a fraudulent loan without proper verification. And now my client is facing the loss of his home." Arthur presented the evidence methodically. The financial records. The forged signatures. The video footage of Michael trying to break into the safe. The admissions of guilt on tape. It was a devastating case, an airtight case. The bank's attorney listened, his face growing paler by the minute. He'd thought this was going to be an easy case, a quick victory. He hadn't expected to be challenged. He hadn't expected to be embarrassed in front of a judge. "These are serious allegations, Your Honor," the bank's attorney said. "But we have no way of verifying the authenticity of the evidence. For all we know, it could have been fabricated." Arthur turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have documentation from handwriting experts confirming that the signatures are forgeries. We have hospital records showing that my client was undergoing surgery on the date the loan was signed. We have video evidence of Michael Patterson attempting to break into his father's safe. The evidence is undeniable." William watched the judge's face as she reviewed the evidence. He could see her expression changing, the skepticism giving way to something else. Something that looked almost like sympathy. The bank's attorney tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. "Mr. Patterson," she said, turning to Michael. "Do you have anything to say?" Michael stood up, his hands shaking. He looked at his father, his eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry." The judge was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. "The court finds that the loan in question was fraudulently obtained," she said. "The foreclosure is hereby dismissed. The property at 742 Maple Street is protected by an irrevocable trust, and no judgment can be made against it." William let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The house was safe. The house was his. But William wasn't finished. He'd come here to protect his house, but he'd also come here to protect himself. To make sure that Michael couldn't do this to anyone else. To make sure that justice was served. "Your Honor," William said, standing up. "I'd also like to request that charges be filed against Michael Patterson for identity theft, fraud, and attempted theft. The evidence I've presented today is more than enough to support such charges." The judge looked at Michael, her expression cold. "Mr. Patterson, you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. But I must warn you, the evidence against you is overwhelming." Michael tried to speak, tried to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. He just sat there, staring at his father, tears streaming down his face. The police arrived a few minutes later. They handcuffed Michael and led him out of the courtroom. William watched his son go, his heart heavy with grief and anger and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Michael looked back at his father one last time as they led him away. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, no blame. Just sadness. And a flicker of something that looked almost like hope. William sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. It was over. The house was safe. The fraud had been exposed. And Michael was going to face the consequences of his actions. But William didn't feel victorious. He felt empty. Hollow. Like he'd lost something he could never get back. Arthur put a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, William. You protected yourself. You protected your legacy. And you gave Michael a chance to change." William nodded slowly. "I know. But it doesn't make it any easier." "It never does," Arthur said. "That's the thing about family. It's always complicated. Always painful. But it's also the most important thing in the world." The house on Maple Street felt different after Michael was arrested. It was quieter, of course. Michael had always been loud, his presence filling every room, his voice carrying up the stairs and through the walls. But it was more than that. It was the absence of tension, the lifting of a weight that William hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For 2 years, Michael had lived in that house, eating William's food, using William's electricity, sleeping in the room that had once been his childhood bedroom. For 2 years, William had made excuses for him, had told himself that Michael was just going through a rough patch, that he'd eventually get his act together. For 2 years, William had enabled his son's self-destruction. Now, the house was empty. Michael's things were gone, packed up by the police and stored in evidence. His room was bare, stripped of everything that had made it his. The bed was still there, the dresser, the closet. But the personality was gone. The chaos was gone. The constant, grinding anxiety was gone. William walked through the house, room by room, trying to feel something. He expected to feel relief, maybe even joy. But all he felt was a profound, aching sadness. His son was in jail. His son was a criminal. His son had tried to steal everything he owned. How had it come to this? William sat down in his father's old armchair, the same chair where he'd sat so many nights, reading the newspaper, watching the evening news, trying to make sense of the world. He stared out the window at the oak tree in the front yard. The leaves were gone now, just bare branches reaching up toward the gray winter sky. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. A bird landed on one of the branches, a sparrow, small and brown and ordinary. It hopped from branch to branch, looking for food, looking for warmth, looking for something to sustain it through the long winter ahead. William watched it for a long time, feeling a strange kinship with the little creature. They were both survivors, both trying to find a way to keep going despite everything. The bird flew away, disappearing into the gray sky. William was alone again. A week after the hearing, William received a letter from Michael. It was written on prison stationery, the handwriting shaky and uncertain. William opened it with trembling hands and began to read. "Dad. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask for your time or your attention. But I had to write to you. I had to tell you that I'm sorry. I know I've said that before, and I know you have no reason to believe me. But this time, it's different. This time, I mean it. I've been in here for a week now, And I've had a lot of time to think. I've been thinking about everything I've done, everything I've put you through. The lies, the theft, the gambling, the way I treated you. I was so consumed by my own selfishness that I couldn't see what I was doing to you. I couldn't see how much I was hurting you. I remember the day I forged your signature on those loan documents. I was so desperate, so scared, so convinced that I had no other choice. I told myself that it was just a temporary solution, that I'd win the money back, that I'd make it right. But I was lying to myself. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I just didn't care. I think about Mom a lot. I think about how disappointed she would be in me. She always believed in me, always thought I could do better. And I let her down. I let everyone down, but I'm trying to change, Dad. I'm really trying. I've been going to counseling while I've been in here. I've been trying to understand why I made the choices I made, why I let my addiction control me. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm making progress. I'm starting to understand myself in a way I never did before. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever trust me again. But I want you to know that I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to become the man you always believed I could be. I love you, Dad. I always have. I was just too lost to show it. Michael. William read the letter 3 times. The first time, he felt nothing but anger. The same old promises, the same old apologies, the same old words that meant nothing. Michael had said all of this before, had promised to change before, had broken every promise he'd ever made. But the second time, something shifted. William noticed something different about the letter, something he hadn't seen before. There was no blame, no excuses, no self-justification. Michael wasn't saying that it was anyone else's fault. He wasn't saying that he just made a mistake. He was taking responsibility for everything. He was owning his choices. The third time, William felt tears streaming down his face. His son was in prison, but his son was also trying. He was trying to change, to grow, to become the man he'd always been capable of becoming. It wasn't enough, not by a long shot. But it was a start. William folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside his bed, next to the picture of Eleanor. He didn't respond. Not yet. He needed time to think, to process, to decide what he wanted to do. A few days later, William received a call from Arthur Jenkins. "William, I've been thinking about the bank's actions," Arthur said. "They approved a $500,000 loan against your house without proper verification. They should have noticed the forged signatures. They should have contacted you to confirm the loan. They were negligent, William. And negligence has consequences." "What are you suggesting?" William asked. "I'm suggesting that we sue them," Arthur said. "The bank was careless. They approved a fraudulent loan without doing their due diligence. You could be entitled to significant compensation." William was silent for a moment. He'd never sued anyone in his life. He'd always believed in resolving disputes peacefully, in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in finding common ground. But this was different. This was about holding people accountable for their actions. This was about making sure that no one else had to go through what he'd gone through. "How much could I get?" William asked. "Hard to say," Arthur replied. "But it could be substantial. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. The bank made a serious mistake, William. They need to be held responsible." William thought about it. The money would be nice, of course. He could use it to fix up the house, to travel, to do the things he'd always wanted to do. But it wasn't about the money. It was about principle. It was about making sure that the bank didn't do this to anyone else. "Do it," William said. "File the lawsuit." The bank's response to the lawsuit was swift and aggressive. They hired a team of high-powered attorneys, filed motions to dismiss, tried to drag the case out as long as possible. They argued that William had been negligent in protecting his personal information, that he should have known what Michael was doing, that he was partially responsible for the fraud. Arthur was undeterred. "They're just trying to intimidate you," he told William. "They don't have a case, and they know it. They approved a fraudulent loan without proper verification. They're hoping you'll give up and go away. But we're not going to do that, are we?" William shook his head. "No. We're not." The case went on for months. Depositions were taken, documents were exchanged, motions were filed and argued. It was exhausting, draining, emotionally and financially. But William didn't give up. He couldn't. He'd come too far to quit now. The bank's attorneys tried everything. They questioned William's memory, his competence, his mental state. They tried to paint him as a confused old man who'd forgotten signing the loan documents. They tried to blame Michael's addiction on William's parenting, on his supposed neglect, on his failure to be there for his son. William listened to it all, his anger growing with each passing day. They were trying to destroy him. They were trying to make him look weak, confused, incompetent. But he wasn't any of those things. He was a strong, capable man who'd been wronged by his own son and by a bank that had been too careless to do its job. The depositions were the worst. William had to sit in a room with the bank's attorneys, answering question after question, being grilled about every detail of his life. They asked about his marriage, his career, his relationship with Michael. They asked about his financial history, his medical history, his mental history. It was invasive, humiliating, and deeply painful. But William kept his composure. He answered every question honestly, calmly, with dignity. He refused to let the bank's attorneys break him. Finally, after nearly a year of legal wrangling, the bank agreed to settle. They offered William a substantial sum of money, enough to pay off his debts, to fix up the house, to make a fresh start. They also agreed to implement new policies to prevent similar fraud in the future. Arthur reviewed the settlement offer carefully. "It's a good offer, William. It's more than we could have gotten at trial. And it saves you the stress and uncertainty of going to court." William nodded slowly. "I'll take it. But I want one more thing. I want them to issue a public apology. I want them to acknowledge that they made a mistake and that I was the victim." Arthur smiled. "I'll see what I can do." The bank agreed to the apology. They issued a public statement, acknowledging that they had approved a fraudulent loan without proper verification and that William Patterson was the victim, not the perpetrator. It was a small victory, but an important one. William had been vindicated. His reputation was restored. William took the settlement money and put most of it into a trust fund. He didn't need it. He had everything he needed already. But he wanted to do something with it, something that would make a difference. He wanted to help others. He wanted to turn his pain into purpose. The idea came to William one night, as he was sitting in his father's old armchair, staring out the window at the oak tree. The leaves were starting to come back, tiny green buds that promised new life, new beginnings. Spring was coming. The season of renewal. William thought about Michael, about all the other addicts like him, the people who'd lost everything to gambling and couldn't find their way back. He thought about the families they'd hurt, the trust they'd broken, the lives they'd destroyed. And he thought about what he could do to help. What if he could turn the house into a halfway house? What if he could create a place where recovering gambling addicts could come to rebuild their lives? What if he could give them the support and guidance they needed to break free from their addiction? It was a crazy idea, he knew that. He was 70 years old, retired, living alone in a big house with more rooms than he needed. He could have just sold the house, moved to a smaller place, lived out his remaining years in peace and quiet. But that wasn't who he was. He was a teacher. He'd spent his whole life helping people, guiding them, giving them the tools they needed to succeed. He couldn't just stop now. William called Arthur the next morning. "Arthur, I have an idea. I want to turn the house into a halfway house for recovering gambling addicts. I want to help people who are going through what Michael went through. I want to give them a chance to rebuild their lives." Arthur was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of emotion. "William, that's a wonderful idea. Your father would be so proud of you." "He'd be proud of me for something else too," William said. "He'd be proud of me for forgiving Michael." Turning the house into a halfway house wasn't easy. There were zoning laws to navigate, permits to obtain, regulations to comply with. William had to raise money, hire staff, create programs. It was exhausting, overwhelming, more work than he'd done in years, but it was also deeply satisfying. William felt like he was building something meaningful, something that would outlast him, something that would make a real difference in the world. Every day, he woke up with a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed and face the world. The first residents arrived 6 months later. They were a small group, 5 men in their 30s and 40s, all recovering from gambling addiction. They were broken, defeated, struggling to find their way back to a normal life. But they were also hopeful, determined, ready to do whatever it took to get better. William welcomed them with open arms. He showed them to their rooms, introduced them to the staff, explained the rules and expectations. He told them about his own story, about Michael, about everything he'd been through. He wanted them to know that he understood, that he'd been through something similar, that he wasn't just some rich old man who decided to do a good deed. "You're not alone," William told them. "I've been where you are. Not the gambling, but the pain. The shame. The feeling that you've ruined everything, that you can never fix it. I know what that feels like. And I want you to know that there is a way out. There is hope. It won't be easy, but you can do it. I believe in you." The house on Maple Street slowly came alive again. The rooms that had been empty and silent were now filled with the sound of conversation, of laughter, of people working together to rebuild their lives. The kitchen was always busy, residents cooking meals together, sharing stories, supporting each other. The living room became a gathering place, where they held meetings and therapy sessions and group discussions. William found a new purpose in running the house. He'd been a principal for 35 years, and now he was a different kind of principal, guiding people through the most difficult times of their lives. He used all the skills he developed over his career. The patience, the compassion, the ability to listen without judgment. He was helping people heal, helping them find their way back to themselves. The residents responded to William's warmth and sincerity. They opened up to him, shared their stories, confessed their deepest fears and regrets. William listened to each one with the same compassion, the same lack of judgment. He'd been through his own dark night of the soul, and he knew that everyone deserved a chance to find their way back. "Mr. Patterson," one of the residents said to him one evening, "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me hope. You've shown me that I can change, that I can be a better person. I don't think I would have made it without you." William smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep trying. Keep fighting. That's all I ask." A few months after the halfway house opened, William received another letter from Michael. It was longer than the first one, more detailed, more reflective. "Dad, I've been in here for a while now, and I've had a lot of time to think. I know I've said this before, but I really am sorry. I'm sorry for everything I put you through. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I'm sorry for destroying your trust. I've been going to counseling while I've been in here. I've been trying to understand why I made the choices I made, why I let my addiction control me. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm making progress. I'm starting to understand myself in a way I never did before. I think about Mom a lot. I think about how disappointed she would be in me. She always believed in me, always thought I could do better. And I let her down. I let everyone down. But I'm trying to change, Dad. I'm really trying. I've been going to counseling, working through my issues, learning to manage my addiction. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm making progress. I'm starting to understand myself in a way I never did before. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever trust me again. But I want you to know that I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to become the man you always believed I could be. I heard about the halfway house. I heard about what you're doing, helping people like me. I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of what you're building. It's an amazing thing. I love you, Dad. I always have. I was just too lost to show it. Michael. William read the letter slowly, carefully. He could see the change in Michael's words, the growth, the maturity. His son was still in prison, still paying for his crimes, but he was also healing. He was becoming the man William had always known he could be. William folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the others. He still didn't respond. Not yet. But he felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the knot that had been tied so tightly around his heart. He started writing back a few weeks later. Short notes at first, just a few sentences. Acknowledging that he'd received Michael's letters, that he appreciated Michael's honesty, that he was proud of the progress Michael was making. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. A few months later, William received a call from the prison. Michael had been released early for good behavior. He was coming home. He wanted to see his father. William wasn't sure how he felt about it. He'd been thinking about Michael a lot, wondering what would happen when he got out, whether he would relapse, whether he would be able to stay clean. He wanted to believe that Michael had changed, that he was serious about getting better. But he'd been disappointed so many times before. When Michael arrived, William opened the door and saw a stranger. This wasn't the same man who'd been arrested. The Michael who stood on the porch was thinner, more tired, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked like hope. "Dad," Michael said, his voice shaking. "I'm home." William didn't say anything. He just opened his arms and embraced his son. They sat in the living room, in the same house where Michael had grown up, where he'd broken his father's heart, where he'd committed his crimes. The oak tree was visible through the window, its leaves full and green, swaying gently in the summer breeze. "I know I don't deserve this," Michael said. "I know I don't deserve to be here. But I wanted to see you. I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry, that I've changed, that I'm not going to let you down again." William looked at his son, really looked at him. He could see the fear in Michael's eyes, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that his father would give him a chance. "I believe you, Michael," William said. "I believe that you've changed. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. You're not the same person who left here all those months ago." "I'm not," Michael agreed. "I've been through a lot, but I've also learned a lot. I've learned that I can't control everything, that I have to accept my limitations, that I have to ask for help when I need it. I've learned that I can't do this on my own." William nodded slowly. "That's a hard lesson, son. It's one that I had to learn too." "What do you mean, Dad?" William thought about all the nights he'd spent alone in the house, worrying about Michael, wondering how to save him, feeling helpless and alone. He thought about the trust his father had set up, the protection he'd never known he had. He thought about Arthur, about the lawsuit, about the halfway house. "I thought I could handle everything on my own," William said. "I thought I could fix you, fix our relationship, fix everything. But I couldn't. I had to learn to ask for help. I had to learn to accept that some things are beyond my control. It wasn't easy, Michael. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done." "I know, Dad. I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize," William said. "You just have to keep trying. That's all I ask." Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of hesitation and hope. "Dad, I was wondering. I know it's a lot to ask, but could I live here? I know I don't deserve it, and I know I've done terrible things. But I need a place to stay while I get back on my feet. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to stay clean. I'm going to prove to you that I've changed." William looked at his son, saw the desperation, the hope, the fear of being rejected again. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe that Michael was serious, that he'd changed, that he could be trusted. But he couldn't. "No," William said softly. "You can't live here." Michael's face fell. "Dad, please. I don't have anywhere else to go." "I know, son. And I'm sorry. But you can't live here." "Dad, I don't understand." "Why not? I'm your son. I'm trying to get better. What else do you want from me?" William reached out and took his son's hand. "Michael, I love you more than you'll ever know. But I can't let you stay here. You need to prove that you can stand on your own 2 feet. You need to prove that you can live without my support. You need to prove that you're ready to be independent. And I can't help you do that by letting you move back in." Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand, Dad. I don't like it, but I understand." "But I'm not going to abandon you," William continued. "I want to help you. I want to pay for your therapy. I want to support you while you get back on your feet. But I can't do it by letting you live here. You need to find your own way. You need to prove to yourself that you can do this." Michael left that evening, but he didn't leave empty-handed. William gave him the address of a good therapist, an apartment complex where he could stay, and a small amount of money to get him started. He gave him his love, his support, his belief that his son could still become the man he'd always hoped he'd be. The months that followed were difficult. Michael struggled to find a job, to stay clean, to rebuild his life from the ground up. He had setbacks, moments when he wanted to give up, moments when he felt like it was all too much. But he kept going. He kept trying. He kept believing that things would get better. And slowly, gradually, they did. Michael found a job at a construction company, working with his hands, building things, creating something from nothing. He continued to go to therapy, working through his issues, learning to manage his addiction. He started volunteering at the halfway house, helping other recovering gamblers, sharing his story, giving them hope. He was becoming the man his father had always believed he could be. A year after Michael's release from prison, William received an invitation. Michael was hosting a small gathering at the halfway house, a celebration of his recovery, of his new job, of the life he was rebuilding. He wanted his father to be there. William arrived at the halfway house to find it transformed. The building was clean and bright, filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. The residents were there, along with the staff, along with some of the people Michael had met in therapy. They were all there to celebrate Michael's success, his growth, his determination to become a better man. Michael met William at the door. He looked different than he had a year ago. healthier, happier, more confident. He was wearing a clean shirt and pressed pants, and his eyes were clear and focused. "Dad," Michael said, embracing him. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, son." Michael led William through the building, showing him the improvements, introducing him to the residents. William was touched by the respect and affection that the residents showed Michael. They saw him as a mentor, a guide, someone who'd been through what they were going through and come out the other side. "I'm proud of you, son," William said, when they were alone. "I'm so proud of you." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." The halfway house flourished under William's leadership. It became a beacon of hope for recovering gambling addicts, a place where they could find support, guidance, and the strength to rebuild their lives. William poured his heart and soul into the work, giving his residents everything he had. But he was getting older. The arthritis in his hands was getting worse. His energy was flagging. He knew he couldn't run the house forever. He needed to find someone to take over, someone who shared his vision, someone who would carry on his legacy. He didn't have to look far. Michael had been working at the halfway house for months, helping the residents, sharing his story, giving them hope. He'd become a mentor, a guide, a source of inspiration to people who were struggling with the same addiction that had nearly destroyed him. He was ready to take over. He was ready to lead. "Dad," Michael said one evening, "I want to talk to you about something." William nodded. "Go ahead." "I know you've been thinking about retiring, about finding someone to take over the house. And I want you to know that I'm ready. I want to take over. I want to carry on your legacy." William smiled, tears streaming down his face. "I was hoping you'd say that, son. I was hoping you'd say that." A few months later, William officially handed over the leadership of the halfway house to Michael. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. But William felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the house was in good hands, that his son would continue the work he'd started. "You've done an amazing thing, Dad," Michael said, at the ceremony. "You built something from nothing. You gave people hope. You showed them that they could change, that they could become better. I'm going to continue that work. I'm going to make you proud." William embraced his son, holding him tight. "You already have, Michael. You already have." On a warm autumn evening, 5 years after Michael took over the halfway house, William sat in his father's old armchair, looking out the window at the oak tree in the front yard. The leaves were turning red and gold, the colors of autumn, the colors of change. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. The residents were there, in the other rooms, working on their recovery, building their futures. The house had become a place of hope, a place of healing, a place where broken people could find their way back to wholeness. William thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the loss, the fight for justice. The lawsuit, the halfway house, the reconciliation with Michael. It had been a long journey, a difficult journey, a journey filled with pain and heartbreak. But it had also been a journey of growth, of learning, of love. And now, Michael was carrying on his legacy. Michael was the one who was helping people, guiding them, giving them hope. Michael was the one who was making a difference in the world. William's father had given him a gift, a legal protection plan for the house. And William had used that gift to protect himself, to fight back, to build something new. He'd used the gift to help others. He'd used the gift to save his son. The house on Maple Street was a house of second chances. It was a house of forgiveness. It was a house of hope. William smiled, thinking of his father, the man who had built this house, who had raised his family here, who had protected him from beyond the grave. He thought of his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally. He thought of his wife Eleanor, the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. And he thought of Michael, his son, his child, the boy he had raised, the man who had broken his heart, the man who had found his way back. The house on Maple Street was the Patterson family legacy. And it would continue to be a legacy of hope for generations to come. That night, William sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The sky was a riot of color, orange and gold and deep purple, and the air was cool and crisp. The oak tree stood tall in the front yard, its branches reaching up toward the fading light. Michael came out and sat beside him. They were silent for a long moment, just watching the sunset, enjoying each other's company. "I'm proud of you, son," William said finally. "I want you to know that. I'm so proud of the man you've become." "Thank you, Dad," Michael said. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without your faith in me, your support, your love. I was so lost, But you never gave up on me. I never will, son. That's what fathers do. We never give up on our children. Michael reached out and took his father's hand. I know I can never make up for what I did. I know I can never fully repay you for everything you've done. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. I'm going to be the best father I can be to my own children. I'm going to carry on your legacy. I'm going to make you proud. William squeezed his son's hand. You already have, Michael. You already have. Epilogue: The legacy that endures. The house on Maple Street still stands today, a beacon of hope for recovering gambling addicts. It has helped hundreds of people over the years, giving them the support and guidance they need to rebuild their lives. Michael runs it with the same dedication and compassion that his father showed. William passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the people he loved. He was 92 years old, a man who had lived a full and meaningful life. He had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but he had also found forgiveness and redemption. He had built something beautiful out of the ashes of his pain. The house is still filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. The oak tree still stands tall in the front yard. And the Patterson family legacy lives on, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances.